Our next and final speaker is Dr. Larry Smarr. He has come here to San Diego from Illinois, and big data was mentioned. He's certainly familiar with big data. At the University of Illinois, he was the founding director of the National Center for Superconducting Applications. Here at San Diego, he is exploring the individual effects, and so much so in monitoring his own conditions and exploring how all this information can be used with bioinformatics and with computing power and Moore's law to increase knowledge, to personalize your own health status, and to perhaps challenge the current model for the healthcare system. Please welcome Dr. Smarr to the stage.
Well, thanks very much. We have an institute, one of the Governor Gray Davis Institutes for Science and Innovation. In fact, Bob Dines was, along with Ralph Cicero, the then Chancellor of Irvine, the co-PIs on this back in 2000. And the UCSD, UC Irvine partnership each have a building. The one here, Atkinson Hall, houses the Qualcomm Institute, which you've heard mentioned. And so what we try to do is live in the future and report back. Some 5 to 10 years, basically. In other words, take the trends that are currently clearly happening, but then go up the exponentials a bit to see what things would be like in a few years, and then figure out how that's going to radically change things. Now, I'm going to talk about one aspect of the things we've studied at Cal IT2, in particular, since the beginning. You remember this $4 billion human genome? Well, at that time, we said where we were going to be now is in digitally enabled genomic medicine. The genome would have gone from $4 billion to $1,000, which it has. The cellular internet would have been built out. It was 3 years later in the future that the first cellular internet was introduced in the United States, and starting in San Diego and Washington, D.C., and that would enable to read out the state of your body. Now, I'm a physicist, computer scientist, and when I look at a complex dynamic system, I used to do, black hole accretion, colliding neutron stars, things like that. You have these complex systems. You look for what the base variables are and then see how they develop in time. That's the only real way you could explain things. So when I got into this idea of quantifying myself, I assumed that's what you do. It turns out that's not really what medicine does, but it's where we're going, because we will now be able to do this, and we never were able to before. This idea of quantifying yourself, not just at the way I'm doing it, but lots of ways, is explosively grown. The first meeting of quantifiedself.com in 2008 has grown now to 116 cities and 37 countries just 4 years later. There's an explosion of widgets that you've seen. I was one of the early users of body media back 10 years ago. I did 700 nights of using the Zeo on my forehead to measure every 30 seconds the state of my sleep. I've done months of doing every gram that goes in my body with these things. These are all things I've used. But we're past that point now. Really, we're in the merger and acquisition and bankruptcy phase of a startup. This is not just something you can ignore. I mean, when Kleiner Perkins leads a Series A, it's time to pay attention. This is taking off. Fitbit, which Bob Dines and I are among, say, a dozen people who each week report the number of steps we've done. As a youngster compared to Bob, I am humiliated by Bob every week, because although I can get like 8,000 steps, 4 miles a day on average, Bob does twice that. So I've got to pick up my game. So the point is that this is becoming a real social phenomenon, so much so that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded us first to do a survey nationally of this field, and now has funded us to actually build a network of innovators across the nation in personal health data. Now, Lee Hood invented that gene sequencer we heard about a long time before the human genome was actually done with it. And he is the head founder and the director of the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle. And he has been saying for 10 years that what we're seeing is this convergence of this systems biology you heard from Shu about to systems medicine, the consumer-driven social networks. You know, we talked 10 years ago, and you say, yeah, well, how different is the world 10 years ago? Well, 10 years ago, Zuckerberg was an unhappy male in a dorm room at Harvard whose girlfriend had just done something bad to him, he thought, and so he hacked into all the other dorms and got the girls' faces and created the first Facebook. There are now 1.3 billion people in the world, and Zuck, his net worth went up by $2.5 billion in one day a few months ago with just one move of Facebook stock. This is how rapidly the scale is changing. And when you intersect that with systems biology and the big data that Shu talked about, you get something that's very different. Now, I, for years, because of my quantification I'll talk about, Lee Hood has referred to me as his human lab rat to sort of see the future of this. But the question really is, as I become more common, how does the quantified consumer integrate into the healthcare system? Because all this data is outside of the healthcare system. It's not in your medical record. It's not something your doctor knows. And it's exponentially increasing, whereas what's in your medical record isn't. So Lee has started up what he calls the Healthy 100 Pioneer Program. I'm one of the first people in it. And this is not just doing the self-tracking devices and medical histories and so forth, but taking and preserving blood, urine, and saliva, looking at not just your human genome, but your gut microbiome, which I'll talk more about. And we're starting with 100 people, and then we're looking at them in time over time. It's like a Framingham study. So the idea is to take people who are healthy, but a certain fraction are going to get unhealthy. Well, Lee believes you'll see that early if you're tracking these biomarkers. Now, I like to say, people say, well, that's what you have a doctor for. Really? One of the things about being an astrophysicist is how many hours in the year there are. And that's how many. And so out of 8,760, it's actually 36. But anyway, one of these, maybe on a good year, you have with your doctor. All the other 8,059, you're alone, on your own, in charge of your body. Every bite, every sleep or not. And so that's why you've got to have tools. If you're going to understand and become a real partner with your doctor, you've got to know who you are. And so here's an example over the last 10 years of just me. I started when I got here, I was overweight and needed to get exercising and so forth, so I started stepping on a scale. So I had one number every day that had a time series of that one number that defined me. But then I realized I could start taking blood variables. I'll spare you the story why, but I started taking 100 or 150 things in my blood and then later in my stool. I was an early adopter of 23andMe, which measures 1 million of the points along your 6 billion diploid human genome. That is where 90% of all human variation occurs. So now I got 1 million numbers defining me. And now that I'm working with Craig Venner's Institute on sequencing my gut microbiome, I'm up in the tens of billions. And so this is what you're going to have for every individual. Now, how do you go through this big data? Well, one of the things that we've worked at the Qualcomm Institute for many years on is scalable visualization. So you have visual data analysis. This is our 64 million pixel wall. Each one of these screens here is an HD screen. Like you'd love to have at home in your home theater. And those graphs are my probably 60 blood tests and 50 stool tests in the last 5 years that are showing you the oscillation of everything like your cholesterol and your liver and your kidneys and your white blood cells and red blood cells and all the rest of it. Well, when I looked at it, I found there was one variable that was way out of whack that was my overall inflammation, my CRP, complex reactive protein. I couldn't figure out why that was and traced it down to just 6 inches of my sigmoid colon, got an MRI, working with my doctor, and then as soon as I got out of the tube, I said, give me my data. That's something you learn to say. Give me my data. It's your data. If your body generates the data, it's your data, and you should own it. And so I took it back because we have, of course, virtual reality experts at the Qualcomm Institute, and so they created this sort of fly-through video game of my body, which I've given many, many tours of now. But you also hear about, these 3D printers. Well, we've been doing that for 5, 6 years. And so I said, well, just send my disease part of my colon to the 3D printer. I said, really? I said, yeah, I think it'll work. And sure enough, there it is. So I can actually go in and look at it and understand it a lot better, and I use it actually with the doctor. But once I understood it was my large intestine that was the source of this inflammation, which was a surprise to me. I didn't expect that to happen. I tried to understand what was it about the large intestine that was the problem. Well, over the last 5, 6 years, we've understood that in your large intestine are 10 times as many cells as in your entire human body. So 90% of the cells in your body are not human. They're microbial. But more importantly, if you talk about the genes, each gene makes a protein on the DNA, and if you say, well, let's think about the DNA in my body, 99% of those genes are not in the human DNA. They're in the microbe DNA. Now, the problem is that none of this microbial information is in today's medicine. It's not in why we have health, we have disease, there's no treatments, anything else, because until we had 100,000 to 1 million-fold decrease in the cost of genome sequencing, you couldn't tell who you were. And this microbe population changes every time you eat something. So the inclusion over the next 5 to 10 years of this vast new trove of information about each of us is going to radically change medicine. So to understand how it might be that that would change medicine, I decided to turn my body into a genetic observatory, by the way, publicly sharing the data, which is a sort of a high-risk behavior when the regulations, as we heard earlier, aren't in place to protect the individuals, except for the human genome information, and even then, only for health insurance, not life insurance, catastrophic care insurance, so forth. A lot of work to be done in the legal and regulatory framework. But nonetheless, we got to move on to figure out what that world's going to look like. So I took, over a year and a half, I took stool samples, sent them off to the Venner Institute in Maryland. They sequenced very deeply using Illumina next-generation sequencers. You come up with basically the unit that comes out of the Illumina is 100 bases, 100 A, T, C's, and G's in a row that you know. Well, it produces 200 million of those. Okay, so you have 200 million jigsaw pieces that you have to put back to figure out the 200 different species, each with their own DNA, that are inside of you. I then was able to go to the National Institutes of Health, which for the last 8 years or so has funded the Human Microbiome Program, and I could download 255 healthy people's microbiome, the data, and also some people that had inflammatory bowel disease, which is what it turned out that I had. And so altogether, we're talking about 2.7 trillion bases of information. Well, to analyze that, fortunately, the San Diego Supercomputer Center here, I was able to get a discretionary grant of 25 CPU years. And so using a very complex set of software that we developed over the last 8 years under the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation grant to build a global environmental microbial DNA base, we were able to reduce that to well, probably several thousand species, but in we look at, say, the top 200. So what you're seeing here is on the left, you're seeing 3 different times, 3 different stool samples for me, and so you're seeing how the microbe ecology evolves with time, and on the other side, you're seeing what a healthy person looks like and what people that have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis look like. And when you put it together, you don't need to know the scientific name, just think blue and red. But on average, people have 2 major phyla, the big divisions of life, that are in balance with each other. And part of the job is to keep suppressing the bad bugs that you all have, but they're maybe hundreds of a percent or something. But what you can see is that the blue on the healthy gets reduced to a tiny little sliver from, say, 2/3 or 3/4 of your microbe species are in this one phyla to only, say, 1.5%. So it's a drastic change, and that hasn't been really appreciated before, that it's such a big change. Same with ulcerative colitis. You see this explosion of the proteobacteria, which are the E. coli. And where am I? Well, I have features of both. And what this is leading to, I also went through my human genome, and I have certain characteristics that are associated with each disease, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. So we're going to get a much finer gradation of the types of disease state that you're in. Now you say, well, this is, CPUs and everything else, this is not about consumers, but it is. Ubiome, which I serve in the scientific advisory board for, was crowdsourced, funded, and now is sending out thousands of these simple Q-tip studies that you do. You put in a little vial, put it in the U.S. mail. I just did 3 this morning. And this is from July of 2013 until February of this year. The yellow bars are where I did actual samples, and you can see the change over time of your microbial ecology. This is a startup. So the New York Times, when the big results of the Human Microbiome project came out, said that what we've got to do is get away from this war metaphor that we've always had for medicine, where you're going to kill the microbe. Most all these microbes are incredibly important to keep you healthy. They do all kinds of ecological services for you. So get rid of the war metaphor and talk about gardening. You've got this complex, you are an ecology, just like your garden. And you've got to learn, if you want more of one thing and less of another thing, how do you pull out the crabgrass and make the roses bloom? Well, we have a series of fertilizers, and in this case, I think you're going to see the rise of a $10 billion a year medical food industry that is tuned to these individual microbes and will bloom one more and get rid of the other, and this is all going to happen in the next 5 years. I think it's just going to be explosive. So everything I've talked about you can do with startups. You can do with things that are under $100 per person, whether it's tracking the blood variables over time, the stool over time, the genetic variations in your human, the human SNPs, or your microbiome and its change over time. So then people say, finally, okay, say that I'm an individual, I've got all this data, it's fine for you to be a scientist and you can read hundreds of scientific papers and figure this all out, but what am I going to do? Well, Watson, that IBM developed, remember Jeopardy? It's investing $1 billion in Watson. Watson's read all the medical textbooks. It's read all the scientific articles, and by the way, remembers all of them perfectly. So that is where we are now. But how many of you saw the movie Her? Okay, a lot more of you need to get out. This is an incredibly important movie. It's a good movie, first of all, but it really gives it gives you a human sort of sense of where the artificial intelligence and deep learning based on deep data is going. It's going incredibly fast, and that's why you see companies like Facebook and Google and all the others getting the very best people out of Stanford and Carnegie Mellon and everything else into their companies. Ray Kurzweil, who wrote the Singularity is Near, is now one of the directors of engineering at Google. So this is going to give personal assistants that are always with you, that learn every time you do anything, you eat anything, you move, your heart moves, and it will tune its analysis to you as you give it more and more data, but it also has all of the rest of humanity's data that it's able to compare you with. And so you will not have to worry about having personalized assistance. So in summary, what you've got is, like it or not, there's this explosive growth of data about your body, who you personally are, outside of the medical establishment. You've got the development of what I call these post-Watson personalized coaches. You've got the doctor who now, imagine me going in to see a doctor. It's not like I have a stack of WebMD articles that I printed out, right? This is the new reality that the doctors have to learn to live with. The best doctors you already see are moving rapidly toward becoming a partner with the patient. Coaching has a tremendous experience of cases they've seen before that you will never have as an individual, so it's a tremendous partnership. I think you're going to see a major move toward medical foods from pharmaceuticals, although they'll continue to develop. And with this data, the whole point is to keep you healthy by giving you day-to-day, moment-to-moment feedback so that you make better choices. And the obesity epidemic that's run for 3 or 4 decades in this country will maybe peak and begin to decline. Otherwise, of course, it'll bankrupt the country. Thanks.
Do we have any questions? Food intake we're going to do on?
Yeah, so the food intake is the most important thing, actually. MyFitnessPal, we just had the CEO, we did a national summit of Quantified Self at the Qualcomm Institute a few months ago. The CEO of MyFitnessPal was there. 60 million people are currently using it to measure if you eat processed foods, which I would advise you not to do, you just use the barcode and it uploads all of the data about that particular food. I actually, since I do everything from scratch, organic, locally sourced, wild, etc., I measure every gram into the database. It then breaks it back out into calories, proteins, carbs, fats, salt, starch, fiber, and then you set goals for what you want to modify your body to, and then I did that for 4 months for every day. I've then gone back and did it another month earlier this year. But there's 60 million people using it. You really do build your precious temple one mouthful at a time. So if you don't know what you're putting into your tank, would you put water into your gas tank because it's over $4 to buy gas? No American would do that. But they throw all this other pseudo food into their body and think there won't be any effect. That's crazy. So we're going to learn better.
I'm just wondering, hearing this is fascinating, thank you. I'm just wondering, as we take this huge amount of data and then we graft it onto into the traditional medical paradigm, we're assuming that a lot of the conclusions of that medical paradigm make sense. So I wanted to raise the issue that's come to me as a practicing oncologist. That, for a while we were treating anemia in cancer, and we came to see it as possibly a good reaction of the body.
The body's fighting, right?
The body fighting. The same might be said of fever, of course, and it might be said of that colony that's causing inflammation within you.
Right. The body makes inflammation because it's trying to do something. I mean, when I measure inflammatory variables like lactoferrin and calprotectin and so forth in my colon, those are antimicrobial inflammatory agents that the body is producing because it detects microbes that it thinks shouldn't be there. The trouble is, when you have such a massive alteration of the expected ecology by the immune system of your microbiome, it goes crazy and starts attacking you. It's collateral damage. And so if we can get the microbiome gardened back, we may be able to turn off some of these inappropriate immune responses.
If I may pursue this, I'm wondering whether that is an adaptive response. In other words, that's part of rebalancing.
Well, it's trying to rebalance, but the trouble is, if you actually look at these curves, what happens is, because it's a nonlinear dynamic system, once you're out of a little local equilibrium homeostasis that you spend most of your life in, and over into one of these other equilibriums, like where I ended up, you know, that's not necessarily a healthy equilibrium, and so the body can try to, you know, use its feed forward and feed backwards, but it's not going to go too healthy. And so there's got to be something that bounces you back over into the healthy equilibrium, and we don't really understand that at all at this point.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was really fascinating. I have a question regarding using the biome information to educate other professionals, such as nutritional experts and registered dietitians, because they're going to have to be educated pretty fast as far as what the public already wants to go into, managing their own health with all these informatics they can get out from the public. So do you have a strategy for reaching out to other professional bodies so that they're moving in sync with you? Because this biome principle is really important for the society to move towards wholeness concept of disease prevention or modification.
So how do we get the word out about the biome? Well, you know, it was the cover of The Economist 2 years ago, the cover of Scientific American, the cover of Science, the cover of Nature, New York Times. I mean, it's getting out there, but the trouble is that the doctors are completely untrained. And they couldn't be trained because we didn't know this information. And this is what happens when you have a scientific revolution of this scale. There's such a lag. I just gave a talk to all the graduating pharmaceutical students on this. You know, I probably was the first lecture they heard. So this is why I don't, it may be that the medical community magically is going to find a way to react quickly enough, but I don't understand what the mechanism will be. This is going to be out in the public far beyond what it is inside the medical community, and that is why I call it disruptive. Now, we see that again and again. That's what disruption's about. So we'll end up with some different involvement, much more paired together, much more wellness focused, and so forth. I couldn't predict that at all. I do give a lot of talks like this, but it's such a vast universe out there of the medical field that that's why I think it's going to be a disruption. It's not going to be smooth.